What's up, guys? Welcome to Breaking Biotech. Thank you so much for watching today. My name is Matt, and if you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, leave me a comment. Follow me on Twitter at Matthew Lapoire. I do a decent amount of updates on Twitter whenever I'm going in and out of positions quickly, so it makes sense to follow me there. And this week I did do that relatively frequently. A lot of stuff going on in the last little while. I was not able to do a video last week because I went camping, so didn't really have it in me to interrupt the trip to do an update, even though there was a lot going on. So not going to get into everything that I'd like to talk about, but I'll probably save it for a future video. But today we're going to talk about the BAN 2401 subgroup analysis. We're going to talk about the Esperion phase 3 trial, and we're going to finish up with the Adamas Q3 earnings report. But so that one's going to be kind of disappointing, but we're going to finish off on a positive note. Mostly because I was able to get in and out of some XBI puts in the last week or so that gave me a bit of a return to make up for the blood that was going on last week. So the market took a deeper downturn, but actually finished up almost where it started. So I was able to get in and out of a few put options here and there. So it makes sense, when you can't predict the overall market sentiment, to have some hedges in place, and I was lucky to make a bit off of that. So, we could we could this week come back and test the lows. We didn't completely break out of this bearishness, so it would have made sense to buy a put on XBI or IBB at the end of the week. I didn't, but we'll see what happens. The next support that I see is around 74 on the XBI. And so those are kind of the things to look out for overall. But the wage growth numbers that came out on Friday are very positive. So there's a lot of indicators that say we still have a lot of room in this bull market to go, even though the housing data, the new housing permits are down. But so those macro events you should keep in mind, even though it's hard to predict sometimes. So anyway, let's get to some of the science. So Biogen and Eisai, they're involved in a lot of Alzheimer's products and trying to bring a treatment that works to the market. I touched on BAN 2401 in previous video, so please look at that for background because I'm not going to go through all of it today, but I am going to talk a little bit about what's going on. So BAN 2401 is an antibody that binds to amalgamations of A beta, and one of the things that happens in Alzheimer's disease is you get these amyloid plaques that are made up of this A beta protein, and we're not really sure if this is a main cause of the disease or it's a result of the disease, but there's been some trials that have gone on in the past to show that this probably is more a result of the disease and not necessarily the cause of it. But Biogen has an antibody to really investigate that. And they have two products, aducanumab and BAN 2401. BAN 2401 binds to the A beta protofibrils, and specifically, and it leads to them being not able to aggregate together, and so they decrease in the brain, and you can measure that. And they've actually shown that this product works very well in mammals to remove plaque from the brain, and they can measure that. The problem is, though, that it doesn't always correlate with an improvement in cognitive function, and that is really the metric that Alzheimer's patients want, as well as the FDA and pretty much anybody who wants a good treatment for Alzheimer's. So the problem that Biogen had is that they had an imbalance in the patients between the placebo and the treatment group, especially the 10 milligram per kilogram group, in the ApoE4 carrier status of the patients. And the reason why that's important is because ApoE4 is associated with more severe form of Alzheimer's disease. So in this figure they show here, they basically had to stop enrolling people onto the 10 mg per kg biweekly dose who had not reached 6 months, and they also just stopped randomizing them after July 2014. So as the trial continued, they stopped enrolling people in that trial, so it was more heavily skewed towards people that weren't ApoE4 carriers. So you could imagine that when you're looking at the final data, it's not really fair to compare it to placebo because the groups aren't they're not really the same. So the market didn't take very well to that. The stock dropped, and then last week or the last video I did, I said it might be a good idea to short these guys in coming to this. And, the macro events of the market really took a downturn. So I decided not to short Biogen itself. And instead, I bought some XBI puts, but I wasn't specifically focusing on Biogen because the market itself was going through some things. So anyway, the other things that went on with the studies, they initially had they wanted to use Bayesian statistics instead of normal parametric statistics. So they had that originally set out, and then they didn't want to use that. So this entire study is kind of frustrating because there's a lot of things that didn't work out as planned. So if we go to the amyloid burden, without a doubt, this lowers the amyloid burden in the brain. Nobody's going to question that. You can see using this PET scan, the, God, I forget what this measures. Oh, in the cerebral spinal fluid. I think that's what this is. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically they see a huge drop in the amount of amyloid burden, which is good. Now, is this enough to cause a clinical effect? I don't know. Maybe not. And but what they're arguing here is that this reduction in amyloid burden led to this much improvement in all the cognitive metrics. So ADAS-COM, they saw 30% less decline. In the ADCOMS, 30% less decline. ADAS-COG, they saw a 47% decline, and CDR-SB, they saw no difference pretty much. Now, remember, at 18 months here, the 10 mg per kg dose has an imbalance of ApoE4 carriers. So this is what everybody's mad about, including me. So is it really fair to compare the placebo group, who has much more ApoE4 positive patients, than the treatment group? Now, they did some correlation between, PET scan and amyloid clearance and clinical efficacy, and they saw that, that's fine. Nobody's going to complain about that. What we really want to see is what's going on with the subgroups. So what they did is they broke down so overall, like, subgroup analysis itself is going to be flawed. Many studies have looked into this, saying that you can't do subgroup analysis and then go back and say, oh, this is how the study was. Here's the real conclusions we can draw from the study. It's been shown over and over again that subgroup analysis isn't very strong, even though we like to use it to confirm our pre-existing kind of biases. So from the outset, it's not best to do subgroup analyses, but this is what we're left with, so it's worth looking at. So they compared the slope between the ApoE4 carriers and the non-carriers, and apparently they improved at the same rate. Now, the number of patients they have in the non-carriers isn't that much, but this does support the idea that both carriers are being treated to the same extent. They're both getting an improvement. They did another analysis looking at what factors contributed to success, and they don't give us very many details on how this was conducted, but they're arguing here that ApoE4 status was not a big factor. Clinical stage was, which makes sense. AD meds make sense, and baseline ADCOMS also make sense. So they're arguing that ApoE status is not involved, despite the huge imbalance. So this is the chart here that is most important. So the clinical effects of ApoE4 carriers and non-carriers at 18 months. So what they're showing here is that the non-carriers have basically no effect, pretty much no effect, when it came to band 2401 treatment, but the ApoE4 carriers did have an effect. So the reason why you saw, according to them, the reason why you saw only a modest improvement is because you averaged these, and it turned out to be not as substantial compared to if you broke these up. You really see where the difference is. So they're arguing here that the ApoE4 carriers show a pretty substantial effect, and they don't really know why, and I don't know why either. There's not really a great reason why. There might be one, but we just don't know. And this could be something that's relevant. I'm leaning towards this being just a result of having only 10 patients at the end of this data. So I don't know what we're supposed to do with this. 10 patients is what they're showing us in the 10 mg per kg biweekly group, and they're showing an improvement in ApoE4 carriers. So, they're kind of looking at this as a win. I look at this as more confusion, and this isn't helpful in any investor to say that, oh, definitely if we lower the amount of amyloid beta in the brain, we're going to get an improvement in cognition. So this is not very positive for me at all. Why did so many patients? I mean, I think they had to, well, so they only ended up with 10, even though they started with 48. In the placebo group, there was a dropout rate, but it was significantly less, and we're not exactly sure why. Yeah, so this is what we're left with. I would not invest in Biogen based on the band 2401 data. This even puts the aducanumab data a little bit in suspect because, what is it about band 2401 that would lead to this? Whereas aducanumab, we don't see a difference between ApoE4 and carriers and non-carriers. So, I think they're gonna move ahead with the phase 3, and I mean that's gonna be the real deciding factor. This is gonna be sort of a controversial piece of data in the life of this product, and if phase 3 can really come with positive and very clear data and a balance of patients when it comes to ApoE4 status, then I think we'll have a better idea. But I'm not going to invest in Biogen, and I don't encourage anybody to do so based on their expectation that band 2401 is going to show positive data. But that won't be for some years to come. I think there's some aducanumab data that should come out at some point. It'll come out probably sooner than a phase 3 for band 2401. So that'll be more interesting to me. But anyway, this is where we're at, and it's kind of unfortunate for Alzheimer's patients. But hopefully, with their other products, they might show something good. They have other products in phospho-tau, so that might be where the disease pathology really lies. Okay, so they also talked about aducanumab, which also showed nice data that you reduce the amyloid plaque burden, and it also improves the cognitive decline in patients. So Biogen did a lot on that as well, but I'm not going to go into it. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Esperion. So Esperion came out with their phase 3 trial that we were looking forward to, and they showed that bempedoic acid led to an 18% decline of LDL-C with patients who are on maximally tolerated statins. So the problem is that when you're on statins, you can only reach a certain amount of statin treatment before you get too many side effects associated with an increasing statin dose. So you kind of max out on your statin usage and the amount of LDL-C lowering that you get. So if you use bempedoic acid in addition to statins, you get additional lowering of LDL-C without the side effects that come along with statins. And the problem originally with bempedoic acid and Esperion was that there was an imbalance in patient deaths, and that kind of made regulators and everybody a little bit concerned that bempedoic acid might have something going on. So I thought this was overblown, and the death imbalance was kind of circumstantial. So they did this phase 3 study to look at safety more or less, and also look at LDL-C and these inflammation markers here. So they showed that they got another consistent decrease in LDL-C. There was no difference really in patient deaths. I think there was a little bit higher in the bempedoic acid group, but it was due to things unrelated to cardiovascular disease. So there was like a gas poisoning or something. But if you look at just cardiovascular events, they were 0.8% and 0.8%. So bempedoic acid, according to this study, has really no effect on death within 1 year. So this is a 52-week study. Now, I noticed a lot of people on Twitter were kind of surprised. They would think, oh, why wouldn't there be less cardiovascular deaths in the bempedoic acid group, given that it's got such an improvement in lowering LDL-C? And it's a valid question, but within 52 weeks, CVOT studies, cardiovascular outcome studies, those are much more long term. So when you're looking at deaths, it makes more sense to not expect a lot of difference within only 1 year compared to a CVOT that goes on for multiple years. So you can kind of see that. And they actually did look at MACE events. So these are major adverse cardiovascular events. and they did see a decrease here. And just because you have a major adverse cardiovascular event, it doesn't mean that you're going to die from it. So, and if just 0 people died in the trial, it's not very useful for you. So I don't think it's super helpful to expect them to see a huge difference in cardiovascular deaths, even though you would expect an improvement in cardiovascular adverse events for sure, and that is what they saw. So I'm happy with the results. It's they're moving forward in submitting an IND. I think they released something a couple days ago on what they're going to do. So in Q1 of 2019, they're going to submit an, oh, sorry, I said IND, I meant NDA. They're going to submit an NDA for the bempedoic acid and bempedoic plus ezetimibe combo pill, so that's good. We'll see what the FDA thinks. They might want a cardiovascular outcomes trial, much like what Amarin had to do, and that would put a big delay in approval if they're going to get the label for that. So we'll see. I might sell some of my Esperion, given that I'm up about 20-25%, just because I might want to use that money for something else. So we'll see. I'll put something out on Twitter if I do that. But anyway, I'm pretty happy with the results, and I think that there is a market for Esperion, despite the fact that it's a little bit clouded with a lot more players now, and even some of the NASH players are getting into the lipid space. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. So the final thing I want to talk about today is Adamas. Very disappointing. This is the worst pick I have ever jumped on. So I apologize to anybody who followed me on that. Please keep in mind that none of this is investment advice, and it is merely for informational purposes. But basically what we were hoping for is a certain number of paid prescriptions of Gocovri, and a certain number of prescribers, and a certain amount of revenue. And based on that trajectory, I was expecting them to have a stock price that is in line with that. So what they ended up getting is 4740 paid prescriptions, only 1,200 distinct prescribers. This is huge disappointment, and a revenue of $10.6 million. So for the entire year, I think in the previous videos that I looked at, I was hoping for a total of over $40 million in sales. We were hoping for about 4,000 paid prescriptions, I think, for the year. So they're outdoing it on the paid prescriptions, but they're falling short of the revenue up to date. And the prescribers that they were talking about is 6,500, and they're only at around 1,200 right now. And I think to finish out the year, they're not even going to make half of the 6,500. So this is pretty disappointing, and of course it led to a huge drop in the stock yesterday and the day before. Or maybe it was just yesterday, I forget when this was released. But basically, they are not doing as well as everybody had hoped. So, what are you going to do? You can't win them all. And frankly, maybe I should have seen the writing on the wall, but, what are you going to do? So, I'm in my portfolio here, Adamas, for me, is down 60%. I am torn on whether or not I want to watch this guy burn to the ground or just sell and take my money elsewhere, because at this point the expectations are going to be relatively low for them moving forward. But I don't think the money is just not useful sitting there, even though I'm taking a loss on it. Sometimes it's better to just take the loss and put the money into something else. So anyway, while we're here, talk about the portfolio a little bit. So the XBI itself went up quite a bit on the week, from about negative, it's just under 0% for the year, and it went up to about 1%. I'm up about 6%, and it's mostly due to the options trading I did. But we also saw some big moves in Amion went up a bunch. Illumina with its acquisition. Fate continues to do well. Bluebird was recovered a lot of its negative gains that we saw in the last couple weeks. Amarin continues to do well, and I'm getting tons of flack from my Amarin suggestion that people buy. I think it's, there's just some firms that are hoping to push the stock price down, but I really think Amarin has a bright future in this space, and I don't think I'm alone with that. So don't let the bots fool you into thinking otherwise. Yeah, Sarepta also had a big comeback, and that stock, it really made some huge moves. If you got in and under 120, and looking at it at close yesterday, you did pretty well. So other than this, not really huge moves, and I will let everybody know what I do on Twitter if I do decide to sell my Adamas or anything else. Maybe I'll do a video on the Illumina acquisition, because the sequencing space is huge, and Illumina going to be able to do short read sequencing as well as long read sequencing now is going to make them a real competitor. In really, I mean, they've always been a competitor, but now they're going to compete in the long read space, which is pretty huge for them. So anyway, guys, we're rounding around 20 minutes. Please let me know what you think. Leave me a comment, a like, or a subscribe. And with that, I'm going to leave it there. But thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.